everyone. Welcome to Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, public relations, and authentic storytelling. I'm your host, Lisa Buffo, founder and CEO of the Cannabis Marketing Association. You can connect with me on Instagram at LeeBuff and on Twitter at LeeBuff21. Send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Today's conversation features Edward Montanus, the senior advisor of the Media Gel Foundation. Having spent his entire career in the advertising world, Ted has experience working in all areas of media, including TV, digital publishing, and data. He has spent the last 8 years working in ad tech, providing marketing expertise to some of the world's largest brands. At Equative, he oversees new business development for a range of regulated industries with a focus on cannabis. His work to provide the cannabis industry with access to mainstream digital media has resulted in Equative's global SSP being the largest source of digital supply for cannabis brands and retailers. Ted also serves as the senior advisor on the MJ Foundation board, which awards marketing grants to social impact cannabis companies. Okay, welcome everybody to today's episode of Party Like a Marketer, the podcast dedicated to cannabis marketing, authentic storytelling, and public relations. Today's guest is Ted Montanus, the Team Director for Business Development and Regulated Industries at Equative. Ted, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, it's great to see you again.
Of course. I'm really excited to talk with you on the podcast. I know we've had, I think I've known you for a few years now, but we've had a lot of conversations about cannabis marketing. It's been really interesting and fun to see you grow in your role and just the different challenges you've tackled in this space. So could you first start by letting our audience know a little bit about Ted, who you are, where you're located, your history, and just kind of, tee us up to how you got into cannabis marketing and your background?
Yeah, so I've always worked in advertising. I grew up around the business, did internships in college. Like I always wanted to be in advertising and television. And so, I started my career on the television side, actually, working at a Dish Network in Denver,
Nice.
Where I went to school. So that was like my first intro to, just like the cannabis culture too, being in Colorado while that was, just kind of starting out, that movement. And then, from there, I moved back to New York City, which is.
Where'd you go to school in Denver?
I went to Regis University. So, one of the only ones right there actually in downtown Denver, right off I-70, across from that, kind of sketchy looking amusement park, that everybody passes on their way to the mountains. And then from there, I moved home, and took a job actually at DirecTV, kind of doing the same thing. I started off, in long form television, and
Home being New York City.
Yeah. So I grew up around the New York area, about 45, 50 minutes outside of Manhattan. And so it was, nice to be home. And I really think when I moved home, that's like when it turned from, shaking off college and it being a job to a career, because, maybe it's part of, being in New York and the hustle of it. But, I spent a good amount of time at DirecTV. And then, went more on the digital side. So I started working at a digital publisher, which was, Crave Online, kind of a millennial mail site. We had a counterpart in Totally Her and She Knows, and, a lot of websites people, have probably heard of. Spent some time there, really learning all the digital, and programmatic was kind of somewhat new at that time. So I went into mobile advertising and really my first, ad tech experience.
What year is this? Like, just so we have a basis, how new it was?
Maybe around 2012,
okay.
2011. Yeah. And then I was fascinated by the use of data. So started working for a data company. And then after that, I found myself here at Equative, formerly Smart, which is a global ad tech company based in Paris, and I'm in their New York City office. When I joined, I was the first person on the demand side of the business, and like in our industry, when we say demand, it's really representative of like advertisers and brands and the agencies, and and the partners, less of like the supply, which is content. Our supply in this industry is anything from websites to television shows. So representing them, selling to brands and advertisers, agencies. So I've always spent my time in my career on that side of the business, and I've now been here for 5 years.
Okay. So can you explain what you mean a little bit by representing the demand side? Like, how exactly does that work? Are you in touch with these brands who are seeking, seeking ads and seeking supply and helping coordinate them with, like, just tell me a little bit more about exactly
Yeah.
what that means for those who don't
Yeah.
know.
So, whether it be television, digital publishing, data, and Equative is, encompassing of all of those things. It's a large platform, and it operates like an exchange. And so, what I represent is the publisher side. So let's say if it's digital, you log on a website and, the ads populate. What dictates which ads populate is very, complicated. But, if we think about it just on like the contextual side of representing the supply, it's, I have, this website that speaks to this audience. And so, you should buy ad placement on it because this is where your consumer is, being around relevant content. It's the same with, TV too. You buy certain shows and you measure the success on it based on, the scale of the exposure and how many people saw it and ended up going and buying, a product. So I guess in the simplest terms is, I have the eyeballs and you need them. And so, buying it here, but it's making sure that you buy the right ones. So working across so many different content verticals, from sports and news and lifestyle and entertainment, get to work with so many different brands. I've worked with some of the biggest brands, in the world across all different verticals. Each one of them is so different, and who their audience is. And sometimes their audience isn't what you think. And sometimes you try to tell them that their audience isn't what they think. But within that, some of them have been very, interesting and unique things that we've been able to do. And over my, tenure in this industry of overall advertising, it's changed, quite a bit. And there's a lot of different types of consumers to reach, and there's a lot of different avenues to reach them. Your phone, your desktop, but also the types of content that they're reading. We used to have, back in like the Mad Men days, it was like one show. There was only a couple networks, before cable came out. They were selling, the idea of this one show. It's like a Western or it's something, and then, who would want to buy it? But now, entertainment as a vertical. So it's not, you could have, teen type shows or celebrity gossip, or you could have, more of your comic books and stuff. And those are all very distinct consumers.
Could you name some of the brands you worked with, just so we have some context of the sort of the difference?
Yeah. So I've worked with, everywhere from, Disney to Exxon Mobil to Johnson & Johnson, Procter Gamble. I've worked with, alcohol brands, Diageo, all the way to like, UPS versus like Purdue Chicken, or, Home Depot was always, a pretty, large client, and really across, a ton. I mean, I could probably sit here all day and, list them and have like a story about each one of them, but the difference between like a Procter Gamble, a Home Depot, a Progressive Insurance, and a Purdue Chicken, like, you get to work on such like creative things to help them try to find, the right audience. And like one of the examples I have is with Exxon. Their, I guess, marketing, who they were trying to reach was college students or seniors in high school, and their whole campaign was, be an engineer. So we targeted different colleges and, all sorts of stuff, not getting into the weeds, but that was their audience for that. They sell, oil and lubricants and like, that product. Like, why would they want to go after those? Because, that was more of a branding thing. So each one of these has been, somewhat unique. And I've worked on, some of them for like a Mondelez, like Stride Gum, where it was encompassing of like digital media, streaming TV, but we also had in-person activations too. We actually rented out for them the USS Midway and the San Diego Harbor during Comic-Con and had a concert and party on there. And the way I look at it was like a spreadsheet of line items and prices and stuff. But to them, it was this large activation, but they were able to optimize on it with marrying that and their digital side and the content that was being produced about it. It was all, different avenues, but all one singular message.
So it sounds like you've worked with a lot of larger CPG brands. So obviously there's a tie to cannabis here. So tell me a little bit about how you got into cannabis, how the company did, and kind of maybe some similarities or differences and working with, obviously a lot of our podcast listeners are young entrepreneurs, cannabis entrepreneurs. Like first is how did you get into cannabis from working with these big brands? And then could you talk about some of the similarities and differences you see and how you approach targeting?
Yeah. I definitely got into it, being a college student in Colorado, whether it was the, illicit market or the, legalized market. But then from there, it was more on like the medical side. I'd seen the benefits of it and just, it was always something that was interesting to me. But never really as like an advertising vertical. Hadn't really thought about it as much and, focused on other things in my career. And I guess how I got into it was it started on a boat in Cannes. I know that that's like a ridiculous, but there's a huge, advertising, award show and conference there. It just took place. The internet did not like it. But, somebody that is in the industry met somebody from our company and asked if they would accept cannabis. And, when everybody came back, it was actually Jake Lichtke, CEO of Media Joe, came into our office and asked if we would, accept cannabis advertisers. And we were sure. We didn't really know that, it was, such a big thing. And that.
What year was this?
This had to have been about almost 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. So
18, 19?
Yeah. So that's about how long I've been, more in the cannabis space was from that. And it kind of opened up, it was exciting because it opened up a whole new set of challenges, myself kind of being passionate and understanding the product and I guess progressive is, then having to learn why nobody had accepted it in the past.
From the advertising side.
Yeah. And the content side, and it ended up taking me about a year to get that approval and acceptance to get enough content scale for these advertisers. I was having one-on-one conversations with publishers, would they accept it and to what degree? And then you add in the challenges of each state has different regulations and how do we ensure that it's, the right audience by age? So that was definitely, humbling and was a long process. And now we service, the entire industry to get to that point. And that was really when I kind of like dove headfirst into that this could be something and started reading more about it, not just like the lifestyle side of it, but what I uncovered was that cannabis spans so many different verticals and can be disruptive in so many different areas. It's not just the recreational side of the product, it's medical, it's do it yourself. You have like hempcrete, and then you have sustainability, like it goes across, but it's all hamstrung by the same things. So I looked at it as almost revolutionary, and that's kind of like what's been exciting. I think my only frustrations have just been with like wanting it to keep moving forward and and seeing the acceptance of it and consumer adaption, but it's constantly changing. So coming from like, we'll call it general market or more mainstream advertising with more widely known international brands, and then taking that and coming into the cannabis space, raised a whole different set of learnings and challenges and things to overcome, and just where the industry was at. So as kind of an outsider coming into it, but being passionate about like the actual product itself, I think more so I've become more passionate, or even doubling down just by on the people that I've met in the industry.
Yeah, that's a common answer we get a lot, and both on the podcast and just, out and about, is that the people are a really strong common denominator for what is exciting in this industry, what gets people excited about it and taking these next steps, because so many entrepreneurs and these brands have great personal stories, and that's why they started their companies. But speaking to your point about the learning curve and working in this industry, I mean, when you work for and are representing a bigger CPG brand where they have sort of one unique selling point, like oil and gas, or toilet paper, like it's got one use, it's got a very clear message. But cannabis is not that way. There's so many different ways you can pitch it, many different ways people use it. And, that's just not to different form factors. And that's not even considering the layer of stigma and misinformation that you have to kind of get through first before those messages can resonate. So, outside of just the issues with supply and demand from the publishing side, there's also what is the message underneath that, and how are you continuing to reach consumers, meet them where they are, and sort of sell and market these different products given the different regulations, given the different, that not just the regulations around marketing and advertising, but different states also allow different form factors. I mean, some states don't have flower, some, everyone has things a little bit differently. So there really is a lot when it comes to putting together the marketing plan, so to speak, for these brands who are small and who are growing compared to, a multinational corporation. So just want to validate you on that. But also, I think a year is kind of fast, given that you did it for such a big multinational company. That sounds about right, about the time it would take to get it through, then 3.5, 4 years ago, because things have changed so quickly that even the landscape then is, completely different from how it is today, and how it is today is going to be completely different from how it is a year from now. And that's the fun part and the exciting part.
Yeah. And I think it's, not just bringing in that, perspective of what the bigger guys are doing and then adopting that or educating the cannabis industry. I actually see the cannabis industry doing something that they didn't do, and having personal experience and seeing what some of these brands didn't do. So, working with let's call it a national chain of convenient stores, health stores, if you're thinking like a Walgreens type CVS, cannabis started based out of necessity, doing something that everybody else has been trying to do and fighting for and figuring out, and it's created all these different markets and businesses within it, out of opportunity. It's not that, as an industry we're going to adopt this. And what I mean is attribution, and knowing your customer. And so one example of that is, with this, large convenient store type brand, was that all of their consumer data, I break up consumers into 3 categories, which you have your, loyalty shoppers, your dual shoppers, and your competitive shoppers. Competitive.
What are dual shoppers?
So dual shoppers are, people that, basically shop kind of out of convenience. And like this one example, it's based on location. Like if you live in New York City, you move apartments, you went to CVS at your old apartment, but then you go to Walgreens at the other one just because it's close.
Yeah.
You're not going to drive 25 miles to go to Lowe's when there's a Home Depot 3 miles away. Like the consumer just goes to what's close. So they'll shop at what's, kind of convenient. And then if it's retail, like they might buy Banana Republic, but they might like a shirt at J. Crew too. So they, they're not exclusive to you. But then you have some customers that are very exclusive to that one brand. And those are your loyalty guys. And your dual shoppers, like if this is a Venn diagram, they do eclipse each other, because the competitive ones, or maybe they had a bad experience, is where that little, eclipse happens. And so, but understanding that, you need that data, and you need to know your customer, and you need
And what was the third?
Competitive shoppers.
Okay. Competitive. Gotcha.
Yeah. And, you need to understand your current base of customers, because that's where you're going to, potentially drive the most, revenue of keeping people loyal. That's why we see so many loyalty programs and things. And so, understanding that, your current consumers, then how to get new consumers. So like this one brand, in this case, when they signed people up, you had like that little, barcode that would get all like peeled and gross because it was in your pocket on your keychain, and be on the bar floor sometimes, or you left it. So like, just, we all had those, like your gym one. But
Yeah.
when you got those and you scanned it for either loyalty points or you're checking in, like the people that were signing you up for those were doing the bare minimum. They were just putting in an email address or a phone number. People weren't being as, truthful, about it. And so they had all this data that was, for 20 something years, it was just unusable. And so how do they understand their consumer? They had to relaunch that. And, CRM data is very important to dictate what your future marketing will be. And
Yeah.
keeping those customers loyal, but also receiving feedback from them is very important. And I see, because that all falls under an attribution window to me. And these other, these advertisers, attribution is tough because CPG is very tough, because you could have a Walgreens or a CVS with different SKU codes, but you have to work with each one to get back what products you sold. Like a Colgate Palmolive or Procter & Gamble doesn't know, how many packs of gum or, toothpaste was actually sold that, here and there. They look at like units. And so, cannabis, though, out of necessity, with attribution, I think has really set them up well as an industry for the future, as a consumer, good and product, because,
And can I just clarify, when you're saying attribution, you mean at the brand level, cannabis companies are like taking the time to say this ad drove this purchase.
Yeah, or this marketing drove this amount of sales. And a lot of that has to do, the necessity part of it is because of federal taxation, where you can't, marketing expenses, it's tough that, the other guys can write this stuff off and, do different things where cannabis can't. So if they invest $5,000-$10,000 a month in digital or social or something, that they have to return that amount back in sales, or it's a loss. So they're not looking at, branding, where you have like, you can have different streams. You can have your branding side, and then your, attribution driving side, and a full multi channel mix of advertising. This is much more like, my marketing needs to drive sales, because in cannabis, you're competing in such smaller markets. There really isn't national brands. And when we think of the national brands, more of them are retailers that operate. They're not actually leaf touching or, consumer-based brands. So, we don't see in one state you can buy, one product, and then there's that consistency across states. So we don't have as much of that brand loyalty that we see with other products. Like if you buy Colgate toothpaste, or you buy Crest, or you buy Pepsi, or you buy Coke, we don't see that as much in cannabis.
And to clarify for the audience, when Ted was referring to the tax write-offs, he's referring to the tax code 280E, which basically categorizes licensed cannabis businesses, plant touching businesses as the drug code, or as the tax code would say, drug organizations. So therefore they don't have normal business expenses. And so those business expenses can't be written off. And that includes marketing and advertising. So for non-cannabis businesses, you can write off your marketing and advertising expenses. Plant touching cannabis businesses cannot directly. So there's much higher pressure on showing that ROI, because that's effectively coming out of your bottom line. Just to clarify that point there. So Ted, to that, I do want to ask, what is some advice you have, given that you've got this big picture from the mainstream CPG world and these larger brands, and then seeing, I actually love your perspective, and I've not heard it this way, about how these larger companies can actually learn from cannabis companies, because they are having to be scrappy in ways that when you are up against these challenges, you might take for granted. How to focus more on attribution, how to really tease out what is a branding effort versus what is a marketing sales driven effort. What are some of the things you have learned, or some advice you would give to other cannabis brands and retailers who may be listening, that you've seen kind of merging these two worlds, and just kind of how to approach their marketing from a more sophisticated way?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that I face, coming into it, it's almost, like a frustration of trying to get people to test things that are new. And I really think that, being, it's not just going to sit here and say, be open-minded, but, test and fail, but it's more so test and learn. Don't be afraid of something that you don't understand. And heavying up so much in one media channel can hurt you in the long term. I really think scale is probably the most.
Can you go into that and what that means? Like having so much into one channel, like let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah. So like having so much in differentiation on, in the retailer's shelf space, focusing so much on the packaging, like the messaging across the board is, sustainable packaging, and then also standing out within that. But, don't invest too much in that and get focused on, the brand, because, the brand then ends up becoming, a mirror image of like your personality, not the business side of it. And so, it's a good, something that I learned, early on was KISS, which is, keep it simple, stupid. And I really think that that's important because you have to be adaptable. It's, you want to pick point A and, point C and how you're going to get there. But the storyline is linear. So, and what I mean by that is that your branding, your messaging of the company, it, stays the same or is consistent through it. But the B in between is the adoption of testing and trying new things and understanding that you are going to fail, because the more media mix that you have, the more scale you can drive and the more business that you'll ultimately end up, having. So, focusing on multiple mediums. And then the test and fail part, I think, is like what's most important about this is that, it's not always you tested something and it didn't work. And that it's on that partner or whoever, was doing the test or something that, might have turned you off to that. And it might be because, oh, I'm so busy. This is working. I'm going to focus just on this because, like, I want to keep my job. Like it's across all industries that CMOs have a short lifespan. But in this case, it's more like, being introspective and looking at yourself and being like, okay, why did it fail? Because in my case, like I can give all these brands the eyeballs, the scale, the content, however they want it to be. But, was your messaging good? Like, did the consumer really want to buy your product? Like, what made it stand out? So, always take a step and look at that first, and then try to figure out why it failed. Because a lot of testing and then not wanting to try something again is more based on, a lack of understanding of how things work. So I think it's always important to ask why, and then answer that question for yourself. Like, what did they do? And, why did it not work? Like, keep trying to figure out that why, because all of marketing lives on that one hypothesis. It's just like in life, it's, where do we come from and where are we going? Marketing is driven by something that's very similar that, was said by John Wanamaker, 100 years ago, which was, I know that half my marketing is working. I just don't know which half. And so as an industry, we've been trying to answer that question because marketing is a function of sales. Like you have a business, you have a product, somebody wants to buy it, and then you get something in return, even if it's bargain trader. Marketing is just your way to say, hey, I have this product. So, figuring out how to reach those consumers is, if it didn't work, try to learn why it didn't work and be transparent too. Like what I see and what I don't like as much in, the general advertising too is the, relationship of, coming into it as, from a negative standpoint. I think it's better to, learn what is out there and learn why and where it fits in the overall marketing industry and how it can end up becoming maybe one day beneficial for you. And that transparency is very simple in the fact of like, yeah, like this sounds great. Like we can't test it now, but then stay in contact with that vendor, because you'll find, developing that relationship and stuff is how you'll find who you want to work with, and be transparent with what your challenges are and what your needs are too. But then also use them as a resource. I think seeking advice too, whether it be before investment or after, it didn't work, trying to figure out why it didn't work. And that's also, and asking around, asking for more transparency. I think one thing that the cannabis industry can do that, the overall market is always asking for is transparency. Ask for the reports, ask for this, always ask for more and more information, not just to have like a gotcha moment, but so you can also learn yourself, because it might have not worked, but what was the window you gave themselves? Because if an eyeball saw it, like I saw it, and I always give this to CPI clients. Now, CPI is cost per install, which is a metric we use to value a price versus, scale of how many, impressions you're going to buy. So the action of that price model is, let's say, an install or an acquisition. So it's, like you see it and then you immediately buy it. And why I don't, prefer that price model, and app downloads use that a lot when they buy media. They want to do it on cost per install. So they pay a higher rate back to you per every install.
Saying that I basically converted immediately.
Yes. Yeah. But the problem is, I always give this example to them is that, I ride the train to work and I'm on my phone reading. And if I'm reading an article about, my New York Jets who suck, and I'm reading it and a banner ad pops up and says, download like a Candy Crush or like one of those games you always see, I'm going to finish reading. I'm not going to go, oh, I need to go download this right now. But maybe sometime later on I will. So, that's why it's not a valuable metric. So when you're doing your, linear storyline of what your brand is and what you want to accomplish, it has to be flexible to reach a ton of consumers. You don't want to, stifle yourself immediately out of the gate. But you have to understand what is that window and how do I put a value to it? Yes, somebody saw an ad and they bought this product. That's the best. But also they've maybe seen a couple ads, they're starting to know your business. Like car insurance is a good example. You see so many car insurance ads, and how many times are you really getting car insurance? But when you go, it's like, oh, I need to sign up for car insurance. You remember all of those ads and all those different companies and what they were saying at that moment. But that, path to that purchase, setting those markers is important. And then understanding, how can I close the gaps on some of these, or how can I reach that same consumer in a different place, in a different way? And the only way you're going to do that is if you're open to testing and trying new mediums and investment. It's better to say no in a sense of not right now, but save up for that in the future. Not to say I invested in this, it didn't return any money. And I get that with 280E, but let's say if we end up someday removing that from the equation, you want to be ahead of the game and have already understood what else is out there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I cannot stress that enough, that this is the time to fail early, fail fast, learn and get that, because it is about refining and tweaking your strategy. While the market is as small as it is right now, given that every day it's growing and there's more competition, and it's important to learn and tease those things out so you can double down on what works. I also want to ask what advice you have for cannabis marketers who are early in their career or who are looking to get into the space based on what you've learned the last few years. So heard a little bit about your advice for brands, but for the professional too, what are what's some input you have there, particularly given that you did it coming from, within a corporation and sort of carved out this channel and advocated for that channel within a corporation. What advice do you have there?
Yeah. And, I'll start with the story is, when I was in college and I was looking for internships and, through a family friend, I got introduced to, the president at the time of ESPN, because I'd always wanted to be in sports. Sports was my main focus. I love sports. I was the biggest, still am a big consumer of it. I wanted to be in the sports industry. It was so flashy and cool to me when I was a college student. And when I met with him, the first thing he asked me was, why sports? And of course I went into, I was I'm this fan, I love this, I love that, speaking from a consumer. But his question wasn't, I get it. He actually said this, he was no, I know everybody loves sports. Yeah, we know, but why sports as a career? Because it's very different. being a passionate consumer of something doesn't always translate to a career. And I didn't have an answer at the time. And it's always stuck with me as like, why sports? I started off my career was like the one job I could get coming out of college because it was a difficult market, was in long form television, which was like the religious and shopping channels and stuff, like the ones that you don't think anybody watches. And I was, selling those. And have just ended up in cannabis, so like a long winding path. And now I get to touch so many different verticals and stuff, but it's more so, taking that job to career. And I don't think my first, employment was a job, not a career. And so anybody that's joining the cannabis industry is separating, you as the consumer to you as the business professional. And a job and a career are very different. And what the biggest distinction is that a career is that you're involved in an industry, and it's not just cannabis. Like you are in marketing, and you happen to focus on cannabis, and you could be passionate about something, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be successful. You have to be a student of the industry. You have to understand all different areas of it. And you have to be able to pull in different, hyper consciously different aspects of everything and everyday stuff in life. I think the best advice for somebody to have that's coming in as a career is don't live two lives. Be who you are in your personal life, in your career. If you're take that passion, but focus it on learning about everything else in the industry, like learn all about marketing, because marketing is your career. Cannabis is, what you're just working on at that time. And so as a marketer in that, you have to be able to pull in other worldly stuff. And then if you blend your personal life, like you live it, it's part of your everyday, and that, this is your life, this is your career, you'll ultimately be successful, but you'll also be happy. The whole thing of like, never having to work a day in your life and like that is, it's more so that like you're upset because you're living two different lives. You're one person here, you're one person there. Like they always say cooks don't cook at home, but in this case, like, you're reading that, you're reading this stuff, like it's part of what you talk. So be who you are at home, be transparent, be open. And the other thing is learn. Like, don't just focus on what you're doing when you show up and getting your job done, because that's just a job. But a career is, being out there, building up your brand, yourself, connecting with others, learning from others, attending things, listening, and then when you get to a point of where you learn something, you'll know that you're in your career when you have a take on it, where it's something new, but you already understand why that something new is fitting into it. And then you have a take on it. You're able to understand it, but then also speak against it or speak for it. That's when it becomes a career. And you've gotten to that point when you can look at all different changes coming in and you're like, I see how that works, or, this will be good for this or that, because you understand how it fits into the entire ecosystem. And so, starting out, I think it's always important to learn. And cannabis right now, there's so much to learn. Like it's just completely accelerating. It's a rocket ship across so many different areas, but don't lose focus of learning about marketing and learning about those challenges and stuff and having your own take on it.
I love that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. The why sports thing really resonates, because I feel like I speak with a lot of young cannabis marketers or cannabis professionals who say that same answer because they love the plant and they want to advocate for it, but they don't understand that the way that translates in the professional world is you need to know about the laws. You need to know about how advocacy works. You need to understand packaging regulations. You need to understand the digital media landscape, that having a love and passion for the plant itself is different than getting your hands dirty with some of these things that maybe aren't as sexy or aren't as fun, but ultimately are the vehicles that create that bigger understanding and drive this industry and this plant forward. So I'm really glad you teased that out, because I think that's, you put it so nicely about how that works.
Yeah, it's so funny. My father always famously asked people two questions when he interviewed them.
What did he do?
He always asked everybody he interviewed the same two questions.
But what was his role? What was he interviewing for?
Yeah, media job. He worked in television. He was at Disney for 20 years and ABC television.
Nice.
Was definitely a legend, and was my mentor. And kind of getting into this whole career and job thing is why I've had like a focus on it and speak to it, is because he ended up passing away a couple of years ago from cancer, and he got his medical card in Connecticut at the time, and it really helped him, especially in those later days. And what I had missed most was talking industry and business and stuff with him. And so I got involved with a mentorship program here in New York City. And those learnings and stuff, and I've adapted them because the industry that I live in and the industry that he lived in, are very different, and it's changed. There really wasn't digital when he was in his prime. So and those two questions still have relevancy now. I mean, he was asking them back in the 70s, all the way up until when he retired. And why they're so important for like young people getting into cannabis that are so passionate about it, and the time back to like the live sports. So the first one was like a math question, which was what is 15% of 3,300? No calculator, pen and paper. It was more so just to see how you thought on your feet. The other question was,
I like that.
Yeah, the other question was, who did we fight in World War II? And you got a range of answers. The answer, is, accident, it was, Italy, Japan, and, Nazi Germany is, the full answer. But, and that would throw people completely off, because it's like, I'm interviewing for a TV job. Why are you asking me about history? And the importance of it was, there was a car company that ran an ad years ago. And the song they used in the ad was about a battle lost by the US military in World War II. And the car company was a Japanese car company. And so that consumer market still knew what that song was about, and saw that as like, now we live in a world of cancel culture, and like it only takes one tweet to bring down a brand. And like it was almost foreshadowing, because he didn't, he wasn't around for Society Now or social media. But like that was somebody without social media and understanding of what was going on. Like they lost, millions and millions of dollars having to redo that campaign, like tens of millions of dollars. And, somebody made a mistake of not understanding that. And that's so important in cannabis, because the industry is so passionate, and it's rooted in social equity and social justice and impact and sustainability, and how the product is perceived. And I've been at your shows, and I've heard people talk about, how important that is, and how important it is in delivering your brand message. So it basically, the question was a simplification of, do you understand consumers across all different beliefs and all different interests? Your product has to speak to everybody. It can speak to specific groups for specific reasons, but you don't want to put yourself in a position where you X out an entire group or you offend somebody. Like it's so much more important now because of social media, and thinking about that too. So that question is still relevant. And so that's why education is on the industry and on the consumer. As a marketer, you're marketing to consumers. So you have to understand why that consumer would buy that product, and why the messaging in that is so important.
I love those questions. I think I'm going to start having to ask those. That's great.
Yeah. The other one I almost added was, what is the internet?
Yeah.
And that one's too complicated. People are like, I don't know.
But there's so many different ways you could answer it. I mean,
Yes.
it gets at what people are thinking and what their perspective is. And even, the World War II question, it's like, okay, there's the black and white answer of these countries, but it was also, what was the ideology? What was the principles we were fighting for, and the principles we were fighting, or what we were fighting against. So it's interesting to use that just to tease out how people think.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask a lightning round question.
Okay.
But in what ways do you believe that marketing will either help grow the industry or slow it down?
Oh, yeah. And halt is tough. So, I kind of want to take halt out of the equation. Because
Okay.
just like anything or any industry, you're going to run into different challenges. And, right now cannabis will catch up to this point, but, you read about, the deprecation of cookies and privacy and tracking. And, that was an industry that wasn't rooted in attribution and consumer, consent. And now that's being taken away and very heavily relying on that. So the halt of it is more so a speed bump, because for cannabis, it's only going to continue to grow. Like every day, something's going to change, or more states are going to accept, or the political cycle is going to change, or the terms are up. Like it's just going to continually, change and evolve and grow. But it's more so on the fact that for cannabis in the short term, there's just going to be more opportunity. My focus and what I really believe for cannabis is that, it's an opportunity for an industry to do things disruptively or change things and not do what others have done that hasn't worked, or getting caught into those. But I think that in the next year or 2 years, it's going to be more acceptance. I think as consumer acceptance and adoption of the product in different categories, but also more access to mainstream. My goal is that cannabis has the same seat at the table that all of the rest of the CPG or service or food, any other industry has. So they're all competing for the, same share of discretionary income of consumers.
And any last words or pieces of advice before we wrap up? Anything else you want to say we didn't get to today?
Yeah, I think, also on the growth thing too, I think, there's some brands that are starting to do it well. And it's not necessarily the ones, that we call, the MSOs, the big guys, the big publicly traded ones, like they have their short, everybody has a lot of the same stuff. And there is certain brands that are doing things well. And, ones that I've seen, like a 40 tons, who I do believe, just based on their story and what they represent in the industry, as being potentially one of the first national brands. We're very retailer focused, but I feel like that scale is going to tip, and brands are going to become, more in the driver's seat. And I see brands like that because they're rooted in, the culture and the lifestyle of what the cannabis industry started on, and it's obviously adapting. And that they could be the first national one, because what they've done on a marketing aspect of their social media, who they partner with and who they represent and what they're trying to do and what their message is, it's all very linear. It's single storyline. And they've been very open to testing and trying new things, and are out there and about, and, really do a good job of taking advantage of opportunities that are in front of them. But, and I've had the chance to work with them and speak with them, and that, and why I bring them up is because they're the best example of somebody that really wants to learn.
Awesome. Well, Ted, is there any contact information you want to share with the audience, either personal or company, website, LinkedIn? How can folks get a hold of you?
Yeah. Email is emontanis@equative.com. You can find me on LinkedIn at, Edward Montanis. I'm out there, or, through the Media Gel Foundation. So, I think I'm also in the company or the directory on CMA.
Yes.
So you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, Ted, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your insight with us in the audience today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Party Like a Marketer. Follow us on Instagram at Party Like a Marketer, and on our website, thecannabismarketingassociation.com. Check out our website for more details and membership information. We'll see you next time.